Welcome to Lingua Latina Tutorials with Mr. K, Pensvm D. This video explains the new grammar and syntax found in Chapter 25 of the Lingua Latina per se Illustrata series. It is meant to accompany the Latini Disco text, available from Focus Bookstore, and the Pensvm D worksheets available from 50%latin.blogspot.com or christianlanguage.com. Let's get right into the text. Go with me now to line 2 of the text. We have Quintus who says, Noli me relinquera te hic manera volo. So we have the command. You're familiar with the negative command, noli plus the infinitive, don't leave me. But what's new here is the indirect statement, or accusative infinitive construction after volo. You've seen it after verbs like dico, I say that, or sentio, I feel that. And now we see that you can also have it after I wish or I want. Literally, I want that you stay here with me. I want you to stay here. The same feature is present here in line 4, where Sira says, Quam fabulam me tibi narrare vis? What story do you want me to tell you? Or, more literally, what story do you want that I tell you? So we have, just know that you can have this accusative, like me and te, plus the infinitive, like manera, narrare, indirect statements after volo and its different in its various forms. The next new feature is in line 34, which is, it's somewhat new. You have seen it. It was introduced in earlier chapters, but becomes more common here, and you get a fuller explanation. So we have here, labyrinthus ille in inquo minotaurus inclusus tenebatur, daedalo viro Atheniensi edificatus erat. We'll start there. So that labyrinth in which the Minotaur shut up was being held, or closed in was being held, had been built by Daedalus, an Athenian guy. Qui iam antequam ex urbe Athenis in Cretam venit. Literally, who now already came from the city of Athens into Crete, had made many amazing things. However, that's not good English to start with a sentence with who as a subject, who now came beforehand. And so the initial qui in a sentence, which is a relative pronoun, it does mean who, which, or that, we would translate as a demonstrative pronoun. Say, for example, replacing it with is, ea, id. This guy, is. This guy already came into Crete from Athens, the city of Athens, beforehand, or before he had done that, before he came in, he had made many things, this guy. So think of qui when it's the first word of a sentence as is qui, which you've seen earlier, or just is, this or that guy. The next new feature is in line 38. Follow with me to line 38, where we have Athenis in Cretam mittebantur, qui omnes in labyrintho a monstro illo saevo vorabantur. So what we have is adolescentes was our subject from the previous page. Adolescentes, the young men and the young ladies, were being sent Athenis from Athens in Cretam into Crete. This is our ablative plural of Athenae. Athenae, the city, like many Greek cities, is plural in form. It's a plural only, and it's feminine because it's from the goddess Athena, comes from the goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom. And so this, you'll only find it in the plural form, and here we have the ablative plural. It's an ablative of separation, or motion from. They were being sent from Athens into Crete. We're going to see several different forms of Athens in this chapter as Sira tells us the various Greek myths. The Next new feature is in line 51, where we have et o tempores Theseus vir patriae amans et atque gloriae cupidus Athenis vivebat. So at that time Theseus, a man who loved his fatherland, loving of his fatherland, and desiring glory, or desirous of glory, was living in Athens. A few features here. The first, patriae and gloriae, these two genitives, loving of his fatherland, desirous of glory, these are called objective genitives. The reason they're called objective is because they act like the objects of, like the direct objects of verbs. But they're not the direct objects of verbs, they're the direct objects, or the objects of sometimes participle adjectives like amans, sometimes adjectives like cupidus, and often nouns. But always those nouns, adjectives, and participles will be verbal in some way. They will come from some verb that could take an object, like here amans, from amara, to love. So loving, and the object would be, if it were just an active verb, amat, it would be patriam, loving, he loves his fatherland. But loving of his fatherland, you get the objective genitive. Same thing here with cupidus, coming from cupera, to desire, and so cupit gloriam, he desires glory, but here desirous of glory, the objective genitive. You'll see many examples of objective genitives throughout this story, this chapter, and know that always you're going to have some kind of a verbal adjective, noun, or participle, something with a verbal, that could take a verbal object, but will take a genitive object instead. The next new feature is found right here in the same line with Athenis vivebat, he was living in Athens, and then qui nuper Athenas venerat, this guy, again we have that qui, initial qui, this guy recently had come to Athens, Athenas. So here we have our allocative form. It doesn't look like Romai, like we've seen before, or Tusculi, because the third declension forms its locative from the ablatives, So here, ablative plural, Athenis, can also serve as locative, not only motion away from, like separation like we saw before, but here living in Athens, in urbe Athenis. The other form of Athens here, Athenas, is the accusative plural, and it is showing motion toward. He had come to Athens. We've seen this many times before with Romam. When at Romam, he's coming to Rome, or when at Tusculum, he's coming to Tusculum. Here, motion toward Athenas. And notice that this is not like any declension you've seen before. This is a Greek declension turned into Latin, and so it should look a little unfamiliar to see the accusative plural in os and the ablative plural in is. We'll learn more about that in Roma Aeterna. The next new feature is in line 59. Let's go down to 59, where we have ibi continuo regem minnoem adit, qui eum a militibus a labyrinthum duci usit. So there, straight away, continuo, he went to King Minos, who commanded that he, this is referring to Theseus, that he be led into the labyrinth by his soldiers. So after the verb command, eubera, to command, after this verb, you can also get the accusative infinitive construction, just like we saw earlier with volo, and you've already seen many times before with dicere. So he commanded that, accusative subject he, that he, and then the infinitive, here's a passive infinitive, rather than that he lead someone, but that he be led into the labyrinth. Here in the margin you see the three principal parts of eubera. Don't forget to memorize these. You need to know these verb forms to be able to create all the variety of persons, numbers, tenses, moods, and voices for eubera. So eubera to order, eusisse to have ordered, and eusum esse to have been ordered. The next new feature is in line 74. Go along with me there, and we have Haec locuta Ariadna Teseo filum longum dedit. Having said these things, or having spoken these things, Ariadne gave a long thread to Theseus. This form, locuta, comes from a deponent verb, loqui locutum esse. Loqui, to speak, locutum esse, to have spoken. It has active translations, even though we see passive forms. Loqui looks like a passive form, but it's translated actively, to speak. Locutum esse looks like a passive, perfect passive infinitive, to have, but it's translated as active, to have spoken. Here, what we have is what should be a passive participle from that third principal part, locutum esse, but with a deponent it's only the second principal part, but it is a participle, should be passive, but instead we get an active participle that takes an object. So instead of having been spoken to, here we have having spoken plus an object, having spoken these things, referring to Ariadne having spoken these things. So compare that to an active verb, a regular verb like amare, to love, amara, to love, amawisse, to have loved, and amatum esse, to have been loved. If we took that participle, that perfect passive participle, and compared it, so we had amata, Ariadna amata, Ariadne having been loved, where she's the receiving the love, you could see the difference between that and locuta, Ariadna locuta, Ariadne having spoken something. So having an active form, and then amata being a passive form. We'll see more of those as we go through this chapter a little further. The next new feature is in line 75, where we have another form of deponent, atque ille operire me inquit hic adianoam. And that guy says, wait for me here at the door, don't be afraid. Operire comes from a deponent verb, operiri, to wait for, opertum esse, to have waited for, both of them active in form. Here, operire looks like a fourth conjugation, regular present active infinitive, like venire, to come. But knowing that it comes from a deponent, it doesn't have that form. It doesn't have an active infinitive. So what we do in Latin, we use this form to create the imperative, commanding someone to wait. Operire me, wait for me. So you take your deponent passive form and make the non-existent active infinitive from it to create your imperative. If we wanted to make this plural, we add many, as you'll see in the Grammatica and later in this chapter. Operimini, wait for me, guys, if you were saying, giving a plural command. The next new feature is in line 77, where we have sine timore mortis contra hostem eo. I am going without the fear of death against the enemy. I am going against the enemy without fear of death. And so, timore mortis, fear of death. This is another example of an objective genitive. Mortis is from mors, meaning death, the same as in this chapter as nex, which means death. It's feminine. It follows the Sox rule. If you remember your gender rule for the third declension, error ending nouns are masculine. Sox ending nouns, SOX nouns, tend to be feminine. And then lancet usris nouns tend to be neuter. Here we have mors mortis, feminine, genitive singular, without fear of death. Notice that mortis would be the object of timet, if this were a verb. Timet mortem, he fears death. Sine timora mortis, without the fear of death. Objective genitive. The next new feature is in line 85. And we have Theseus filum Ariadnae secutus exitum labyrinthi facile reperit. So Theseus, having followed the thread of Ariadne, easily found the labyrinth's exit. The new feature here is from secutus. Secutus, we see in the margin, comes from sequi secutum esse, which by now we should quickly recognize as a deponent verb. Sequi, to follow, secutum esse, to have followed, both active, though passive in appearance. So this form, secutus, you can see comes from the supine form here at the, but has it's the perfect deponent participle, and so deponent meaning it's going to have an active sense. So having done something, having followed. So Theseus, having followed the thread of Ariadne. If we compared this with a regular active verb like dukera, duxisse, ductum esse, so dukera to lead, duxisse to have led, and ductum esse to have been led, we see that ductus, which would be the equivalent form of this, is going to have a passive meaning. Ductus, having been led. Theseus ductus, no object. But Theseus secutus, Theseus having followed, active, has an object, having followed the thread, filum. Okay, the next new feature is in line 86, where we have ita Theseus amorem patriae cives suos a monstros saevissimo servavit. So thus Theseus saved the citizens, his citizens, from this very awful or savage monster, ob amorem patriae, because of his love for the fatherland. Another example of an objective genitive here with patriae from patria. Amorem patriae, the love of the fatherland. If we had this as a verb, we'd have amat patriam, he loves his fatherland. As a noun, amorem, on account of the love of his fatherland, objective genitive. The next new feature is in line 95, where we have et tu inquit, or tum Ariadnam conspiciens, et tu inquit sequere me. Then, catching sight of Ariadne, he said, and you, follow me. Sequere me, we've seen sequi secutum esse, to follow and to have followed. Here we have that non-existent present active infinitive looking form, but since it's a deponent, we know that this is our imperative. Follow me, sequere me. And in the margin you see the plural form, which I mentioned earlier, with the mini on the end. Sequimini me, follow me. Notice for the first conjugation, you have the distinctive a, laitamini, follow me. And the second conjugation, the distinctive long e, entuemini, follow me. Third conjugation, we get a short I, sequimini, and in the fourth conjugation, you'll get the distinctive long I, e-mini, which we don't have an example here for our form. Okay, the next new feature is in line 98. So if you follow with me down there, we have Theseus navem solvit et cum filia regis navigavit naxum. Theseus untied his boat, and with the daughter of the king he sailed to Naxos. Naxum from Naxos. Notice in the margin that Naxos, the island of Naxos, or Naxos, is a second declension, an us-e noun, but it breaks the rule of being masculine. The few words in the second declension that are feminine, one list of exceptions is harp, H-A-R-P, which is humus, aegyptus, rhodus, and papyrus. Those four words are feminine nouns of the second declension. Along with Rhodus, one of the Greek islands, most of the Greek islands that are second declension, like Naxos, are feminine in form. So they break that normal rule. But notice that Naxum here, all by itself with the ending, just like you've seen before in previous chapters with tusculum, which could mean motion toward. Here we have motion toward, the accusative, sails to Naxos, all by itself without odd. The next new feature is another form of naxo, and it's just in the next line. Ibi vero nocte silenti Ariadnam dormientem reliquit, atque ipse naxo profectus est. So we have that, go to the very end here, he himself, so he left behind Ariadne sleeping, and he himself set out naxo, which is our ablative singular, which is our ablative of separation here with motion away from. He set out away from Naxos. The next new feature is in line 126. And follow with me there. We see Quintus saying, Obliviscere ilius viri improbi quitetam turpiter deseruit. Quintus says, forget about that nasty guy or that bad guy who deserted you so foully or so shamefully. Obliviscere. This is from the, it's a deponent verb again, oblivisci, to forget or be forgetful. And so this is our imperative form. Be forgetful, or don't remember, forget. But notice the object, oblivisci ilius viri. Forget about that guy, literally of that guy. Don't be mindful of that guy. It might be a way of translating this to capture the genitive of ilius viri. Oblivisci, we see in the margin, takes the genitive. It's the object of oblivisci is a genitive if it's a person. Occasionally, if it's a thing that you're forgetting, it can be an accusative object. But here, note the exception here with our genitive object. The next and last new feature is in line 132, where we see Ariadna Naxi relicta. So with Ariadne having been left behind, or after he left Ariadne behind, on the island of Naxos, Naxi. Here we have our locative, just like we saw long ago, Tusculi in Tusculum. Here we have Naxi on Naxos, or in Insula Naxo, on the island of Naxos, our locative genitive. So there you go. Those are the new grammar and syntax features for chapter 25. Thanks for listening.